I love Doug DeMuro. I think he's the best car YouTuber out right now. 2 years ago, he reviewed the Maserati Quattroporte, and he totally panned it. In fact, I think his panning of that car actually moved the market. I was able to get this 2012 Quattroporte for $28,000. It had a little bit under 30,000 miles on the clock, no issues, no problems, and it's been an absolute delight. I think it's a testament to the quality of Doug DeMuro's work that he, I think, moves markets. I've been seeing this car steadily go down, but I saw some significant price drops around the time he released that video. The one thing about that video review, though, was the things that he was very critical about the car actually was resolved, fixed, updated, or no longer relevant to the refresh that you see here. So my argument is you could actually get an incredible value with these cars now that the common perception out there is that they are hunks of trash. So far, my experience with this car has been nothing sort of glorious, and I'm going to go through each one of the things that Doug DeMuro criticized about the car and show you how they've been fixed. So let's jump right in.
This is a 2005 Maserati Quattroporte, and it is a truly terrible car.
So I'm just going to go through each of the things that he complained about. I'm inside the car right now. The first thing was he hated that when you went into reverse that the car would beep.
When you put it in reverse in this car, it beeps at you constantly. It never stops.
As you can see, no beeping. You can go reverse to your heart's content. And just a side note, that beeping actually is part of Ferrari system. If you go in a 458, when you go in reverse, it has that beeping. I'm not saying it's good or bad, it's just, it was a very Ferrari thing, and I'll kind of touch on this a little bit later. The other thing that he really complained about was the shifter.
Middle here is this really strange little tiny transmission lever that they put in cars for a few years in the 2000s. It's really stupid, and it just kind of shakes randomly unless you want to put it in gear.
Now, the one he reviewed was the infamous Duo Select. In the refresh, they have a actual ZF automatic transmission, so the things that he didn't like about it are no longer relevant. One of the things he also didn't like was the center console. He said had a TV button that was not available in the US.
We will start with my favorite button in the center controls, the one that says TV. You push it and a little icon comes up that says TV not available. I'm going to clue you in here. TV was never available. The TV wasn't offered in the US market, and yet Maserati kept the TV button and just popped that little thing up to tell you about something you couldn't have.
So, as you can see, the unit is old school, but no TV. The center console that he got was notoriously low quality. He said it was shaking, and he thought that every Maserati probably has this defect.
How about the fact that the entire climate control vents and clock in the middle of the dashboard just shake when you touch them? Now, I admit that that could be unique to this car, but I bet it isn't.
Well, here we go. It's as solid as can be. Doug didn't like the cup holders. He said they were really shallow and too narrow for use.
Since I'm in the middle here, let's talk about the cup holder. There's only one. Lovely. And it's about the shallowest cup holder I've ever seen. The cup just flops around. It comes up to about here on a bottle of water. That obviously is a problem when you're in a turn. It can just fly out.
Put this in here. It's pretty sturdy. No problem. He said that he didn't like the color of the seats.
A general flaw this car had. The interior is blue. In fact, the interior in virtually all of these really early Quattroportes is blue. That means blue seats, blue door panels, blue dashboard. I hope you really like blue.
Yeah, I agree. The blue is kind of crazy, but that was the only blue I've ever seen. This is a nice beige, and I'm sure you can get most models in a color that's not that loud blue. He didn't like that the car didn't have a sunroof.
Also, this car doesn't have a sunroof for $106 grand, and it doesn't have heated seats. If I'm paying that kind of money, those are things that I want, especially if I'm driving a cool Maserati.
There you go. He also didn't like how these seats, he said, didn't have heated seats. Well, these seats, they are heated. So, as well as ventilated and massage, adaptive seats. So those are things that aren't relevant for this vehicle. He also didn't like the airbag. He said it was ugly and made the dash too clunky.
Other problems I have with this car include the passenger side airbag cover. In most cars there's just a nice beautiful dashboard. In this car there's a nice dashboard and then this giant airbag cover thing that leaves no question as to where the airbag is going to pop out from, assuming that it works.
They streamlined that.
Cruise control is placed very awkwardly where you'd least expect it, behind the shift paddle, behind the wiper stalk, behind the ignition switch, on the dashboard under the gauge cluster. It makes no sense.
The cruise control, he didn't like how the cruise control was here. He admitted that this was a mistake. These are just the dashboard controls. The cruise control is actually here in the stock. Some of the things he also didn't like was how the paddles were blocking the stalks.
When you go to put on your turn signals, every single time you bump your finger on the paddle because you have to kind of reach around the paddle to put on the turn signal.
I can tell you, my hands, I wouldn't say they're extraordinarily large, but I've never had an issue with them. I can fit just fine without them blocking. He also didn't like how the info button,
steering wheel says info. I have pressed this button at every menu, at every setting. It does nothing.
It didn't work. I think that was just broken on his unit. My info buttons work just fine.
Okay, when you turn it on, the check engine light is the very last light in the gauge cluster to go away. Sometimes it doesn't go away for up to 30 seconds.
Doug also didn't like the check engine light, and it is true, it does stay longer than most cars that I've been in, but not the 22 seconds that he quoted. It just turns on just enough that when you turn off the parking brake, which is also electronic, that'll go off around the same time.
Door handles have two distinct ways that you can open the door once you look at them closely. One does it electronically. You pull it and the door pops right open. The other does it mechanically. Presumably that's because Maserati knew the electronic one would break.
The other thing Doug didn't like was the dual buttons. One was electronic, one's manual. I never had a problem with that. I kind of like the idea of having a backup just in case the electronic one does go wrong. When I drive this car around, I don't even notice the backup mechanical one, so not an issue for me.
Not that uncommon. A lot of car companies put buttons in the back to control the radio, whatever, but in this car, the strange thing is the button on the right side and the button on the left side both do the same thing. They both change the radio preset. You can adjust it up or down on the right side and up or down on the left side. Why put two buttons on opposite sides of the steering wheel that do exactly the same thing? Did they just have extra buttons?
Along the same lines, the other criticism that he had was toward the back here, there are some buttons here. And what they do is they control the nav as well as switch the radio, and to his point, the left side does do exactly what the right side does. I do agree for efficiency they probably should have had them do different things, but it was not a showstopper for me. It didn't cause any kind of complaints in terms of overall ergonomics.
Next we get to the radio presets, and with those you have to wonder if Maserati was just trying to make people laugh. They certainly have made me. Now when you look at the center control stack, there are no radio preset buttons. Instead, the radio presets are only accessible if you go into the infotainment system. But here's the problem. You're driving around with the navigation system telling you where to go. You want to change the radio station? Ha ha ha. Press radio, that gets you over to the radio thing, and then you have to adjust the control over to the preset area. Then you scroll between the presets and choose the one you want. Then, to get back to the navigation screen, you press navigation. So if you want to change the radio while you're driving along with the navigation system on, you have to press 1, 2, 3, and then adjust, and then press navigation again just to change the radio station. And let's hope you want that station, because otherwise you gotta go through the same process again. I can't imagine who came up with that. Seriously, I want their name.
Doug spent a lot of time complaining about the kooky entertainment system in the sense that the radio presets had to be done through the menu. I didn't get that issue. I can change radios just like any other car. So again, resolved.
Rear sunshade, which you will never use, has two buttons, one to raise it, one to lower it. Most other cars just have one button. And if you count the buttons in back, where the rear sunshade also has buttons to raise and lower it, there are 4 buttons to control the rear sunshade.
The other big complaint that Doug had was the buttons here, how one is for the rear sunshade and one was for the rear sunshade to go up. One was to lock the door and unlock the door. Should have just been an on and off. You know, I don't mind. Like the rear buttons on the steering wheel, it's not a showstopper for me. Yeah, it might be redundant, but it's not something that's terribly ergonomically inefficient. It is what it is, and I don't think it should detract from the car too much. Now let's get to driving. The biggest thing that Doug hated about the Quattroporte he reviewed was the dual select transmission, which was clunky, slow, and just generally bad.
The primary issue with this car, and it is a massive one, is the transmission. This is the worst transmission I've ever used in any automobile in history. I think it's the worst transmission ever conceptualized. I think you making a transmission in your basement would probably come up with a better way to put power from the engine to the wheels than this one.
A lot of reviewers, I'd say, agree with him.
Thing is, there's a couple of things that really get on my nerves, and this 6-speed sequential manual is one of them. Ugh. It's called Duo Select, and it's supposed to be tuned to operate in automatic really smoothly. But the trouble is, unlike a normal automatic transmission that has a torque converter that can kind of stretch the moment between gears so that it's very, very comfortable, this is still a manual. It has to let go of the clutch and re-engage it. It means there's great gasping pauses between gear changes, and it's just not smooth for anybody concerned.
The gearbox. It was hopeless. First drives revealed it was a sort of gearbox that gave flappy paddles a bad name. It simply couldn't change gear without giving you whiplash.
Now again, keep in mind, they stopped offering this in 2008. Sometime in 2008 all the way to 2012, you couldn't even get that transmission. By then they had already shifted to the ZF transmission. The one thing that people also forget is, as far as everything else, he was quite complimentary about the car, just like other car reviewers have in the past. So here, take a look.
Of that. Yep, it's an automatic transmission, but it's something that Maserati hasn't had in the Quattroporte. It's always had a compromised semi-automatic.
And in later Quattroportes, they added a ZF's traditional automatic transmission, which eliminates a lot of the problems that I mentioned before. The stupid little gear lever, the replacement of the F1 pump and the clutch, the lurchiness that I'm talking about right now.
That was second. That was smooth. Where's third? Well, these are very smooth gear changes. I don't think you could expect for anything better than that.
One thing that Doug also didn't like was he felt that the exhaust note was too quiet. I can tell you that's because he was inside. It being a luxury car, it has double pane windows that does a really good job of isolating the outside sound, but just roll down the windows. Here's a couple clips. You be the judge.
Quattroporte is not a particularly enticing sound, which is interesting because we know Maserati now with the Gran Turismos being a very loud, exciting car to drive. And that's not true really of this one.
Up ahead, there was a chance for the Porsche to redeem itself.
Oh, hello, tunnel. Oh, sport. There it is, sport. Ah, no noise at all. I've got a 4.7 litre V8 and I can't hear anything.
The Aston put on a better show.
Not bad.
But then came the Maserati.
What I'm going to do now is push the sport button. Oh my God! What this button does is it turns carbon dioxide into noise.
Handling is excellent. Truly, I mean that. It's really, really excellent.
And the contemporary magazines at the time, they all called it the four-door Ferrari, whether it was Car and Driver or Road and Track. Motor Trend had it pit up against 3 other cars at rank #1, and then the most discriminating folks, the Top Gear Trio, here's what they had to say on which car they would pick.
But for me, by a country mile, it's the one I'd have. Me too.
Yeah, and me by a long, long way.
Yeah, so there we are. We all agree on something.